and welcome to Building Futures, career conversations with leading lights across the built environment. Today I have Ceri Evans, who is Regional Manager of Contracts and Procurement for Bechtel. She's a keynote speaker and a keen advocate for diversity and inclusion across the built environment. Hello, Kerry.
Hello, Gaelle. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So we met each other at Construction Week. And bonded. And we were both on a panel about D&I. So when I say to people, this person's passionate about D&I, with you, I've seen it. Because I was actually with you on a panel as we were answering questions, which we didn't know. We were literally just being asked by the audience. And I know your journey, but I also know that you really believe in this and that this is a real passion of yours. So I want to come back to this. But let's start, because people who don't know your bio like I do, let's talk about you. So tell me first of all about your current role, and then we'll kind of circle back and talk about your journey.
So my current role, I've been at Bechtel on and off, like a boyfriend that kind of, you never quite get over. Joined initially in 2005, came back in 2021 as head of business development for our rail division. And currently I'm leading contracts and procurement across EAMS, UK and I for our whole infrastructure division. So that's everything from nuclear, railways, aviation, to renewable energy, heavy civils, dams, motorways, from Saudi Arabia to the Balkans, and across the UK as well. So yeah, quite a big remit. And I would say my responsibility is really people, prospects, projects and process. So in Bechtel it's quite unusual. Functionally, the people are mine. So I have responsibility for where they are, their careers. The projects don't own them, so they're kind of on loan for a period of time. But once they finish those projects, it's down to me to work out, where do they go next? What's best for their career? What's the best fit? So there's lots of kind of people-centric part and recruitment-centric part of the role as well.
Absolutely. And I was lucky enough to watch you interacting actually with one of your more junior colleagues at the Construction Week.
Our new CMP grad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And saw that real nurturing, kind, empathetic leadership style that you have. And that was just something I was able to observe because we were together for pretty much a full day, and watching how you do that. Can we just go back to your own career before we talk about your leadership style? So can you tell me, were you always in construction? Is this something that's been throughout your career or not?
So I'm somewhat of an anomaly, I think, in our industry. So I'm actually a singer by profession or by background. So from the age of 9, I kind of sang for kind of big choirs. I'm from the South Wales Valleys, was a soloist from an early age, ended up being soloist for the Welsh Youth Choir and soloist for Prince Charles at 17. Yes, so a big gig in Cardiff St David's Hall. So ended up doing a music degree at one of the conservatoires, graduated with a degree in classical singing and piano, and then moved into the music industry. So I worked for the contemporary music side of London College of Music, where actually that's probably where I found out I was quite good at commercial and sales, because I was responsible for running the courses there. But obviously there was a huge people-centric part of that as well, looking after 200 students every 6 months, and worked my way through the music industry to a job at Classic FM, where I was office manager there. And Classic FM were bought out by Capital Radio. So at that point, they needed to make most of the staff redundant. I was one of them, and literally, very randomly, found a job ad in The Guardian for a PA role at the Institution of Civil Engineers. So became PA to various presidents, lots of kind of names that are very well known in the industry. Doug Oakovey, Colin Clinton, who was the youngest ever president, Jean Venables was there, John Burland, Quentin Leaper, Gordon Masterton, so massive names. And it kind of sparked a passion in me that I didn't really realise I had. After 3 years, I realised, I wanted more or wanted growth, and then applied for a job as a PA to one of the partners at Bechtel. Knew nothing about Bechtel at the time, and of course Bechtel are the largest privately owned construction company in the United States. And this man, Tom McCarthy, who was one of their SVPs, really, really brilliant leader, saw something in me. So within 6 months, kind of said, well, I think you can do more than be a PA, and gave me a shot at managing the baseline for the prime contract of a 9.8 billion job. So that was my first job in contracts.
Okay, here we go. Let's get thrown in the deep end.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I didn't mess it up.
Yes.
Which was brilliant.
Yeah.
At the same time, we had a huge overrun on one of our stations, so Rugby Station, and in sort of operational rail environments like Network Rail, any overrun is a big deal, particularly if it's over Christmas. It has to be replanned. It can take 2 years at a time. So I then became part of the team in rugby that helped to kind of pull that back on track, and I was given my own contracts to run for the first time. So I did that for a year. Must have done a good enough job, because the client then asked if I could be moved onto the Reading station area redevelopment. And within 3 months of that, I was promoted to the senior commercial manager role, and was given Reading Depot cradle to grave to run from a contracts and procurement perspective. So that was close to 200 million job within a 1.1 billion baseline. It was on the critical path of Reading, so super important, and subsequently has become very, very important in the route into Crossrail as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there was a huge bottleneck outside of London, which was Reading. So we needed to separate the grades, so the freight trains and the passenger trains, could travel at different speeds.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that project was one of few, I guess, in the UK. We delivered it 7 months early, 33 million under budget.
Wow, under budget and early. Yes. Tick, tick, gold star.
Yes, on top of that, we were nominated for 4 British Construction Industry Awards, including the Prime Minister's Award. And we also won the Health and Safety Award in 2014 for the BCIA, so that was super. And then the first major collaboration certification in the rail industry went to our team as well. So that kind of was, I suppose, a period of 5 years. I'd gone from being a PA to running this huge job. So it just goes to show, I guess, that you can reinvent at any point in your career as long as you've got the right support, the right people around you, and the right focus.
I was going to say, because I hear this a lot, that people say, I had the right support and also I was lucky. But I almost want to go, I'm sure it's not just luck. I'm sure there's an element of good, right place, right time. But I've observed the way that you lead, because I saw the way that you were interacting with your colleagues at Construction Week. And I would say, I think it's a bit more than that. I think you're being very modest. What is it, do you think, that has meant that you've become so successful in something that you didn't start out thinking this would be a career, and yet you're right at the top of your game? What is it? Is it something you've deliberately done in terms of the way that you've chosen to interact with clients or to lead, or is it just a style that's kind of grown with you?
I think that's a brilliant question. Some of it starts obviously with having the right mentors and advocates around you. So I think mentorship, advocacy and sponsorship is super important. So when I'm managing or leading teams now, I always say, look for someone you aspire to be. What does their pathway look like, and how do you follow that pathway? And I think also that there's sort of the technical discipline side, and then there's the personal development side. And I think it's very important to be cognizant of both of those things in how you then plan. And I'm sure you've read, I'm reading it more and more now, people who have a plan or a goal, they will get to where they want to be and achieve something. So I always talk about the fact that my brain is very arty on one side and scientific on the other. And certainly at that point in time, I was surrounded by some exceptional technical brains. And I was introduced to the idea of having a development plan. Now, for me, it was very important, or became very important, for me to get a career. I had this kind of vision of, you know, the home I wanted, the life I wanted. I very much wanted to travel. So, you know, in my spare time between projects, I've climbed most of the world's major mountain ranges. I've sailed in you know, some amazing places. And for me, I wanted to be able to kind of carve out some time to do that and be able to afford it. So again, there was some motivation there. So I put together a development plan that basically took, you know, my aspirations and dreams and goals personally, and then my aspirations as far as a career, and I kind of laid them together on a pathway, so that, you know, step one, I need to get chartered. So while I was running Reading Depot, I was able to get chartered within 6 months of completing that job. So again, I'd gone from being a PA to 5 years later having, you know, a master's in quantity surveying and chartering. Incredible. All at the same time. And I'm often asked, you know, how did you do that? How did you run a massive job and do a part-time, well, not even part-time, you know, a personal time MSc and get chartered? And again, I like to pair it back to what's important to you. And, you know, I think we'll talk about this later. I talk a lot about red lines. What are your red lines? Yeah. Where does work stop and then something important to you start? So for me at that point, it was having the ability to kind of do recreational walking and have at least, you know, a couple of weekends a month to myself. So I was very disciplined about, you know, 2 weekends are mine, and I will study and I will do my 10,000 word assignments, and then, you know, 2 weekends are for me to do whatever I want to do. And then I devoted the whole work week, and sometimes it was 12-hour days. Sometimes it was longer than that, but I loved it. And I was able to completely focus on the job and the delivery. Also, I think it's important to be quite introspective. Some people don't realise that they've got blockers and motivators, and they don't really know what those things are. So, you know, we've talked about what my motivators are, but everyone's got what I like to call a core story. You know, I'm not worthy, I'm not likeable, I'm not lovable, I'm not clever. And it can sometimes almost push you towards doing things that don't make your heart sing. And I think we all know that the people that are best at things are doing things they love. So again, I did spend some time doing personal development and looking into, okay, what matters the most to me? I certainly had a fear of failure pre-doing that master's. And in doing that master's, I think I conquered it. And I did really, really well. So it's that phrase, isn't it? Get out of your own way, which...
And just trying. I think often, like you said, we feel stuck and we want to do something about it, and then we are then scared of doing the very thing that we know will get us out of it. Because I think, as you said, there's that art and there's that science, there's the dreamer and then there's the realist. And I think we're always all walking that tightrope in our careers of what is a good challenge to myself that isn't either reckless. And I think it's often, and I see that in people, and I love the fact that you have walked that tightrope. I also love just sort of coming back to sort of like a real how, because which is really useful. Actually, I think people listening find that really useful, is that, okay, this is how I did it. I loved also that you planned rest time. I don't think we talk about that enough.
I agree.
That actually how important, if you were an athlete, you know, we hear about this a lot with, you know, professional athletes. Absolutely. Planned rest time and not actually over exercising or over it. Actually, we don't talk about that enough in the workspace, because there was quite a lot of, especially in the sort of 90s and noughties, of presenteeism. But actually what you're talking about is, in order to be productive and to be able to achieve my master's, to be able to become chartered, to be able to run one of the biggest and most complex construction projects of its time, I actually realised I needed to rest and do stuff for me. And I love that you know yourself well enough. Have you always been like that? Have you always knowing yourself, or has it been a gradual thing to learn how to manage yourself? Because it sounds like you're so in tune with yourself.
I think it's been gradual,
right?
But I was maybe always more in touch with those things than maybe some of my peers. Some of that will be my background. I was a carer for a parent from a young age, and he had a mental health issue. So again, I'm a big sort of advocate for kind of creating that space for people so that I protect their mental health in a work environment. So it was always important to me, and I learnt through that experience that you know, it's an organ like any other organ, exactly what you've just said. And I think without refueling the brain, and I, again, in my keynote speeches, I quite often used to put up a slide from Arianna Huffington, you know, the one where she talks about working herself to burnout to the point where she fainted, hit her head on a table, was completely unconscious. And, you know, we can think we're supermen or superwomen or super beings, but the reality is we're not. And I've had members of my team currently say to me that in giving them permission to take that rest time, they've gone from, you know, third gear to fifth gear. And I think it's so important as leaders to walk the walk and model that. Because so many don't, and if that's what you're seeing, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it, and that's all you're seeing is this kind of representation of I can only get where I need to go by killing myself. Invariably, what comes with it is a point in time where you can't advance. And, you know, going back to a trekking analogy, you've got to stop and refuel and take a deep breath before, you know, you do that final summit. And it's so important, I think, that as leaders we create space for people to be able to do that.
And also, as you said, model it. Because I think indirectly it actually gives people permission, because I think that we often, I think in this day and age now, there's so much out there about well-being. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know it's a good idea to take breaks during the day. There's all those MRI scans of a brain where you've taken a 15-minute break where you haven't. You can get that Teams fatigue, or you feel that you're not quite as sharp or as productive. And I don't think there's many employers now that wouldn't say take a break, but there's a big difference between someone saying it and then someone doing it. And I think if a leader models that, I remember during lockdown, one of the most impactful things that one of my more senior colleagues did was he said, take a break. And then he said, I go for a walk at lunchtime. And I remember him saying that when we were all at home and we were allowed that 1 hour. And I remember him saying, I am going to go now for my walk. And I remember thinking, oh, it's really okay. I know that, and to be fair, I think everyone had said it's okay. But when you actually saw someone say, this is what I'm going to be doing for the next hour, so if you try and get hold of me, I'll be doing that. To me is, because like you said, it's you actually do it yourself. And I think when you share stories like you've just done about, well, when people ask me about how I did my master's, I did it this way, but I still have breaks. Then I could imagine that they would genuinely go, oh, well, no,
they
she
find
really
a way
means it.
to slot it in. And interestingly, I've had people meet me for the first time and kind of go, is this genuine? You know, because we have so many targets as big businesses now. You know, we've all got those targets out in the marketplace for gender diversity, for ethnic diversity, for health and well-being. That's one thing. Creating, you know, plug and socket so that the environment then enables that to happen is a different thing, and that's what leadership is. So when I start with a new team, we all talk about, you know, going back to the red lines. So I've had people say to me, well, I've got 3 kids under 5. So my first question is, you know, how do you work that as a family? So, you know, more often now we've got to be aware of socio-economic changes, the fact that quite often both parents are working. So, okay, how do you manage that then if you're both working? Well, I do pick up and drop off on a Monday and a Wednesday, and they do pick up and drop off on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So we put that in the diary, and that's a red line. So there are no meetings at those times, and there's permission.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they know I'm covering them and they don't have to worry about it. And I will never put in a meeting over that time to increase pressure. And what comes back then is when, you know, I have something on. I had a close friend pass away recently, and my whole team just said to me, Kerry, we've got you. You know, do for yourself what you do for us. And that's what it's about, I think. And it's all different things. It's an aged parent, it's a beloved pet, it's a pub quiz with your partner on a Thursday night.
But you love it, so you have to do it. Yeah.
And it's those things, if people don't feel like they're making those sacrifices, the rewards then in terms of the time they're there and they're present, they're rested. And it does enable people, I believe, to go up a gear. You know, create space, and without space you can't grow. You know, if your head is like a boiled egg the whole time, you're never going to grow and develop. And my role, I feel, is to kind of bring people up to and beyond my level, ultimately. So, and I love it. You know, when you see people that you've worked with for, you know, 10 years or 6 months, suddenly, you know, that moment where you see them start to thrive and they say, I'm ready for something more, you know, you've done your job.
It's, do you know, it's so interesting because as it's such a joy to be able to do these interviews and to spend time. I think I'm professionally nosy because it's my job to help people with their careers, and so I'm always fascinated by successful people. And it's interesting because I think there was this sort of archetypal sort of 1980s, 1990s leader that was very, you know, very sort of alpha and you know, sometimes could be perceived as quite selfish and about themselves, and you know, and what's been so joyful for me is this common thread is actually that the leaders that I'm interviewing now as part of this series are actually the opposite. They're so thoughtful about playing it forward, you know, about, you know, there's someone that I want to be mentoring, or that they are being reverse mentored. And that is something that and they're so generous. But receive back and feel like they're getting so much back from leading in that way.
So much, and I think performance just goes up a level. What's interesting though, I don't feel like we've got the mechanisms yet to measure that.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
totally agree.
You know, we measure top line, we measure bottom line, we measure, you know, how many women versus how many men. But what we don't or can't quite measure yet is, you know, growth.
Yes, personal growth. Personal
growth, outputs, you know, going back to that 1980s mentality and presenteeism, that's very different to output.
Yes.
So again, I you know, and it's different. When you're in client environments, you have to be cognizant of client cultures.
Yes.
But there are still ways within those client cultures to make sure that teams feel safe, they feel listened to. You know, one of the things we train on in Bechtel is filters and understanding. You know, it's at the heart of diversity.
Yes.
We've all come from, you know, different backgrounds. And Roz, who you met recently, she recently did a talk on intersectionality. Yeah. And what was fascinating there was, you know, on the face of it, we looked quite diverse. Yeah. You know, there was me, a sort of, you know, 45 plus woman, we had Roz, and her kind of Kurdish background. But then when we dug underneath, we all had similar, you know, backgrounds. We all felt we were working class. We all felt, you know, most of us had grown up from quite an early age without a father. Yeah. And I think we don't dig into those things enough to find commonality, because the more commonality you find, the more, you know, you have a community in your team. And I know there is not a single member of my team who would feel worried about saying to me, my mental health isn't great today. Yeah. Actually, I'm just having a bad day. My 3-year-old's sick this morning. Yeah. And they wouldn't have to explain it to me. Yeah. But some of that is maybe because I'm a nearly 49-year-old mother of a 3.5-year-old. So there's that cross-generational, you know, understanding. And And interestingly, something we're rolling out now at Bechtel is D&I case studies.
Yeah.
So whereas lots of companies do that with ethics, our head of D&I, Marwa, has recently instigated a series of D&I case studies, designed to really get people into the kind of bones of what that's about, so that if someone hasn't specifically experienced it, it helps them to kind of see it through another lens.
Absolutely. There's you saw it when we were together. I think I showed it to you. If not, I'll send it to you. But there's the wheel of power, and understanding how much power that you have, and understanding that we don't all start at the same level. And as soon as you try and get under the skin of D&I, understanding that, actually acknowledging the power you have, but also acknowledging the power you don't have, or how you can then play that power forward to empower people who might not have the power that you have. You can't change the background that you have, the sexuality you have, nor should you want to. But it's also understanding, if you have more power, how can you help others who have less power than you to go on their journey? And I think that, for me, empathetic and kind leadership, I don't think we talk enough about it. I want to sort of sing it from the rooftops.
And the value, and it's hard to put dollar signs next to it. And there's a massive bit around authenticity. You have to be your authentic self. And it always makes me chuckle, because when I was first starting out, I possibly look a bit younger than I am, certainly then I did, and I was leading this 200 million contract. And I always tell the story of when some of our contractors obviously thought I was the PA or the admin, and divulged their entire commercial strategy in front of me, thinking, we won't tell the the older gentleman in front, because they're probably in charge. And then we got kind of back to the boardroom, and I deliberately don't kind of go, do you know who I am? And have never done that, because I always feel there's more power in sitting there quietly and then delivering something when there is that moment. And through having that experience myself, I think it helps me with other women coming up through the construction environment, to understand it can sometimes feel like you've got to, pound your fists to get listened to or heard. And I think there's sometimes more gravitas in just waiting for the silence, because it will come, and it can be really frustrating. And I used to say, and then at some point you'll say something that lands with such gravitas, you'll never be underestimated again. But it's fascinating. I was on a site visit to one of our big nuclear jobs recently, and the project director of that, he's this extraordinary man, an incredible advocate, in every way. But he was talking about how he still feels imposter syndrome. We went around the table and kind of said, what are you most afraid of? And he surprised us by saying, going around the table and having to kind of speak in an environment with a bunch of other people that I feel like I'm the imposter in. So I think it's also important to understand this isn't just about what's on the outside, it's very much what's on the inside as well.
So I think it's really important that we never make assumptions about people that they don't struggle with imposter syndrome. Because I think once you start discussing it and making it safe to say, actually, I have struggled with this, but I've now recognised, I certainly myself have recognised that I have imposter syndrome, but at certain points. And when it sort of comes back, I now at least I go, oh, right, you're back. Yes. And you almost go, let me think why this has happened. Yep. And it's often in a place where I've just been stretched, or I know there's a project that's going to really stretch me. Or
there's been massive change.
Yes.
So for me, the last time I had imposter syndrome, it was, my little one was super ill through meningitis. We've talked about it, and it's another thing that we bonded over. And then we went straight into lockdown with COVID. So, we had to be super protective of her. And then when I went back to work, I was still probably reeling from a bit of that and didn't have my usual gumption about me, and certainly felt a huge amount of imposter syndrome. And then you remember in hindsight when you felt that before and you questioned yourself, and then something's happened and you realise, no, I shouldn't have questioned myself. So I think, again, as leaders, we can offer that benefit of hindsight. So, to what you said about paying it forward, that's why it's important to share it. Because while we all kind of look super confident in what we're doing, it's because, we've trod that path and maybe we've stumbled and then we've picked ourselves back up again and then walked a few steps forward and realised it wasn't as bad as we thought. And I think it's important to tell people that it's not the end of the world. Mistakes are part of learning. Unconscious incompetence is one thing, but if you're consciously incompetent, that's the moment when the magic happens. Because once you get through that, I often say this point in time is the point at which you will know least. And everything everyone is talking about from the last 6 months will seem like magic to you, and you will feel like the least competent person in the room. But in 6 months' time, you will have gone on that entire journey and you will know exactly where it's come from. So don't underestimate yourself just because you haven't already walked that journey.
It's interesting because we now talk about this phrase, psychological safety, and it's quite interesting as I've talked to people throughout their career. So I've spent over 20 years in recruitment, so I've speak to so many thousands of people about their careers. We never called it psychological safety, but actually it was something, like you said, it wasn't measured, it wasn't something that you could put on the balance sheet, but the ability to feel safe and to be able to be, and part of that I think is then allowing you to be yourself. That I think you have to have the safety first, and then you feel that you can. And then, as you said, then you go into the magic, because then you feel safe enough to go, I don't think I'm very good at this. And either someone will say, oh, you are, or they'll say, let me help you become better. Or how can I help you to get in that place where you can learn and become better? But it's like you said, we can't measure it. And even I would suggest that retention isn't even a good example of it. Because some people say, well, if you are an empathetic leader, if you're kind and you have all those things, people stay. Sometimes the best thing is that they don't. And actually, when I look back on your story, one of the things that's really struck out to me is that you had a boss that actually went, no, hang on, you need to move on. You're great at this. I think you could do more. They weren't selfish, they were empathetic and kind. So in itself, even retention isn't the right one. So you're right, I think we need to come up with a kindnessometer. We need to sort of empathetic meter.
But it's a safe environment to fail. And we need to be clear that failing at something, and again, this was what I had to conquer. If I fail once, I was that classic, I need a grade A. If I don't get a grade A, then I failed. And it's understanding that, well, not necessarily. And of course, now I'm teaching 4-day contracts workshops to people who are coming in, without that knowledge, and I'm the expert after knowing nothing about contracts, procurement, the construction industry at all. So I often make people laugh by saying, I'm the Mary Kondo of contracts. I love filing, and how inspiring that is. And everyone's kind of, filing and governance is so dull. But again, it's about, applying some kind of lens to anything that people are doing that says, like the guy at NASA, you're not just sweeping the floor, you're putting a man on the moon. And it's that equivalent in construction that's so important. And you could be the new person or you can be the leader. Each part of that is so important, and you can't function as a leader without the structure that your team gives you, and I think it's really important to always keep telling them that. I weekly have a meeting, and we have a joke of the week, which has to be a mum/dad joke,
Right,
like a really bad
that
one.
sort of level I'm getting
And then, you know, we also have those moments as well.
So when you think you've got your daughter, you obviously a passionate advocate for D&I, you're a mentor, you're a keynote speaker about getting more D&I. And when you now look at your career, what do you think are the hacks? If you could go, right, the young person or even somebody who's midway through their career, like we both are, what would you say, right, this is my wisdom? If there was one, is there one thing or is there several things that you go, this is what I think's made me the success that I am?
I think there's several. I think one is self-belief, you know, the opposite of imposter syndrome. Self-belief at the core of it, and understand that everyone around you used to be a kid at school. And in their head is still a kid at school. You know, it's the work equivalent of seeing everyone in their underwear, I guess. Have a plan. Have a plan. If you can't come up with a plan, find that trusted mentor, sponsor to help you come up with a plan and work out, you know, where do I want to go and how do I get there, and ask the right questions. I would say be vocal about what you want and what your needs are, and be true to yourself. You know, more and more in businesses, I think there tend to be two types of people. The type of people who just kind of put their head down and expect to be acknowledged, and I don't think that happens. No. It doesn't just happen. So there is part of it that's also about who you know and building networks. That's so important. And understand your industry, you know, get out there, network, speak to people, be inspired. I think that's so important too.
Wonderful. I always knew when I started talking to you that this would be an amazing episode, in the sense of the wisdom that you have. How I don't think when I listen to you that any negativity has come from not being in the construction industry. I think it's been hugely positive to you that you didn't, because I think it has actually, the two coming together of the art side of you and then that you've brought to the job that you do within construction, I think that makes you distinct. I think it makes you really different. I think that empathetic leadership that you have and that kindness is what has made you so successful. And I think that anyone listening to this today, I hope will walk away with that view of actually supporting people and putting other people first is a really good way to run a career. But what I've also loved is there's a deep practicality to you. And I've loved that. And I talk about this with people that ask me about their careers all the time. And obviously anyone listening in is, no, but you need a career plan. And that is what I've loved, is it isn't just, you haven't just come in and gone, oh, let's all look, Gaelle, and I just, you know, happen to be the right place at the right time. I've loved the unpacking of, hang on a second, I've got my red lines, I know what I want to do, I've figured out how it can fit into my life, I need to make sure that I rest, but at the same time, I'm absolutely clear about that destination in my career sat-nav. Is crystal clear, it says this is where I'm going and I'm going to get there. But what I love about you is you're doing that while still having so much energy and to just cheerlead people from the side going, you can do it. And I think that is so, I don't know, it's reassuring, motivating, inspiring, all of those things to the people to go, actually, you can be these things, be hugely successful. You don't have to give that up. You don't have to become selfish or you know, selfish with your time. You can be this generous person and still be successful. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you for talking to me.
And thank you so much for tuning in today. You can hear other podcasts on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your normal podcasts from, or you can watch this video and others on our Hayes YouTube channel.